Hey, Tony.
Tony, you're over here, next to Brian.
Definitely improvise setup here.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I love.
Yeah.
Kids grown up. Glad they have transfer.
Well, it's 6 o'clock, so I'll call to order this joint meeting of the Delta Township Board and the Delta Corridor Improvement Authority Board. Will the board members please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, please call the roll for both boards to see if we have a quorum.
Supervisor Fletcher.
Yes. Here.
Clark is present. Treasurer Fedowa.
Yes, here.
Trustee Bowen.
Here.
Trustee Brewer.
Present.
Trustee Cascarella.
Present.
Trustee Mohica.
Here.
And then for the CIA, Supervisor Fletcher.
Here.
Percy Bean. Chris, I'm gonna slaughter your name. Christopsey.
Should have made her say it. Come on, Chris.
And you get it how I say it, so they're better to have you say it, sorry. Laura Miller. Scott Berman. Tony McGaldy.
Here.
Peggy Von Payne.
Here.
Rachel Helsinga.
Here.
And John Deere.
Thank
You
We
have
a
quorum.
We have the agenda before us. If there's any additions or deletions, a motion to approve as presented would be in order.
Can I please, because we're gonna have a motion and vote, can I please swear her in first?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I forgot about that. Go right ahead. Swear in the new member.
Do you wanna come over here? I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of this state, and that I will faithfully perform the duties of the Office of Quarter Improvement Authority in and for the Township of Delta, County of Eaton, and the state of Michigan, according to the best of my ability, so help me God. I do. If you could sign right there, please. Now you can vote.
Thank you.
Now we would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there support?
Support.
There is support to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Public comment. Is there anybody here this evening to speak? Dan Stockwell, if you'd like to come up to the podium, just state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Supervisor Fletcher. Dan Stockwell, 6822 West St. Joe Highway here in Delta Township. I've come to speak to you about really only one matter. Well, two. First, I am pleased to see you broadcasting the event here tonight. I think that's appropriate. I would like to encourage you to consider doing that all the time and also to allow public comment through that medium. It's fine to come over here, but I would think we would get more public engagement that way. Secondly, I am an advocate for bicycling and non-motorized transportation in this township and statewide. I serve on the Tri-County Bicycle Association Advocacy Committee, which represents thousands of bicyclists in the area. I want you to very carefully consider, as you look at the projects that are happening, make sure that you are taking into account the ability of people to move throughout the township using non-motorized transportation and bicycles. I think that's critically important. And probably the most important part is to connect this side of the freeway to that side of the freeway so that people can move freely in the township using non-motorized transportation across that freeway, around that freeway, somehow to take advantage of what's going to happen in the new development area west of the freeway. So that's, and you'll hear from me probably a bunch of times on these kinds of topics, but please bear in mind the needs of those of us who are bicyclists and those who are pushing carriages and wheelchairs and all kinds of things that happen. Thank you very much, and I have another commitment I have to run, but good luck and congratulations to all of you who are now public servants. And I love that little ceremony. That's good. It's a good reminder. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Any other members of the public like to speak this evening during public comment? Now's your opportunity. Seeing no one coming forward, we'll continue on then with the agenda. The old business items are for the CIA board, and we have the adoption of the CIA board calendar. As you'll see, it will set the meetings to take place on the second Monday of the month at 3 p.m. with one special meeting plugged in. So it's August 9th at 3 p.m. August 23rd at 3 p.m. That's a special meeting. September 13th at 3 p.m. October 11th at 3 p.m. November 8th at 3 p.m. and December 13th at 3 p.m. So is there a motion to approve the calendar so that can be published so the public will know when we're meeting?
Support.
Been moved and supported. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. And then the next item was a review of the bylaws. And I know there's been some comments and questions that's being reviewed, I know by Suzanne now. So the recommendation is to postpone that to our August 9th meeting. So in motion to do that would be in order.
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there support?
Support.
There is support. Any discussion?
Can I just, for point of clarity,
Yeah.
who's voting in this?
CIA board.
Okay, so who made the motion?
I did.
Rachel.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Should identify people since you're taking.
Yeah, and
It's
can
not the
I, for a
usual
point
crowd.
of clarity too, because that's helpful. So you're saying these, as you're calling, because you're on the CIA board, I appreciate that, because I then started worrying, are we all jointly supposed to be at all these meetings? I was gonna say, I was
No,
gonna have a
yeah, so
conflict.
you don't have to block off your calendar.
I was just gonna say, I'm gonna have an issue, a challenge with that. Okay, thank you. I apologize.
I don't think Mary got the second on the motion to postpone till August 9th. By us. Okay, there is, yep, there is Peggy, seconded that. Any discussion?
Just a question, the reason for the postponement?
That they're not ready to go yet, that there were some questions raised and Suzanne's working through some stuff, gonna look at different language and stuff and ready to have that conversation at a future date.
Okay, and if we have comments as board members, not CIA board members about the bylaws, what would be what's the suggestion for us to pass on those, or do we wait until the meeting and discuss them at that time?
You can do either. You can pass any comments now to Suzanne if she's drafting it, or the bylaws will come back to our board as a recommendation from the CIA board, and then the board will weigh in at that time as well.
Thank
So
you,
have that option.
thank you.
Sure. Any other discussion? Dennis?
Just a question, going back to the schedule, the special meeting on August 23rd. What's the rationale for the special meeting?
Suzanne?
In working through the schedule that's included at the end of the agenda packet that you received, thinking about how the cadence of the meetings would go and anticipating that based on tonight's discussion, we probably won't have a draft plan available for the CIA board to review by August 9th, and thinking that we could still meet in August to review a draft if there was a special meeting.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Now we're on to the items for the joint board, the joint discussion, and the two items here tonight is really to discuss the creation and beginning of the development plan, and then a discussion and the beginning of the tax increment financing plan. So with both of these topics, I'll call Suzanne Schultz, who is our consultant that everybody has met so far, who has been working with us through this whole process. And Suzanne, welcome tonight, and we appreciate your guidance as we move through this.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here in person. I mean, I've seen a lot of you virtually, and the CIA board, I had the honor of meeting in person, but yeah, it's definitely something new. So just a really quick background, and this was the agenda, but trying to focus on meeting purpose and kind of why we're doing this evening. We want to provide members of the CIA with an understanding of your discussions as the township board, that you've had extensive discussions with the developer, you've had discussions with the public. So you have some background knowledge that would likely be useful to the CIA as they're starting to do their work. So it provides context with them as they're starting to go through their process. And so that also kind of hopefully avoids the calendar that's based on what was submitted for your review. The goal is to try to get, if possible, the CIA, the development plan and the TIF plan approved by the end of the year. The reasoning for that is the Delta Crossings project, which is a multi-million-dollar project. The construction year, it goes by the calendar year. And so the assessed value currently is based on 2020. And when you start to then go into the next calendar year, then it's reset based off of the value of the improvements that have been done to the land. So there's a value of, if it's possible to include that phase 1 construction, there's phase 2 construction, having approval by the end of the year would allow you to capture that revenue into the TIF. So trying to think about what that is and making sure that everyone is on the same page. So the benefit for tonight is that the Township Board and the Corridor Improvement Authority Board are able to start some initial kind of table setting, if you will, and making sure everybody's on the same page, rather than the Corridor Improvement Authority going off and doing their work, coming back and having concerns from the Township Board and ping-ponging back and forth. So that's just, I don't like doing rework. So I want to just to get the table set right in the first place. We have 3 goals tonight. One is to create a prioritized list of projects on behalf of the township. So what do you think is most important from a project list? There has been some initial discussion and the Planning Commission already weighed in. There was a table, I believe it's on page 11, but it's also up on the board there, that the Planning Commission had some early input and consideration to what they thought might be important to think about. So we've had the benefit of their input. And then also to determine, the second goal is to determine the geography of the TIF capture district. There's been discussions about, is it just Delta Crossings? But we want to make sure that we fully vetted that idea so that you don't come back later and say, well, we wish we would have known, or we should have talked about this a little bit more. So I want to get that out of the way and have that discussion to make sure that we're identifying the geography of the TIF district properly. You've already identified the development area, right? So we know that, but the TIF district and where that is, we want to define that. And then the third goal is to determine the number of years or the terms in the TIF plan. And we'll have some scenarios for you to look at, whether it's 15, 20, 25, 30 years. The maximum you can do is 30 years. So just to get an idea of what the ceiling might be as we think about improvements, and then how we're trying to fill your priorities in and where that goes. And that really starts to set the framework for discussion for the Corridor Improvement Authority. So any questions on those 3 priorities?
So the Planning Commission stuff is in our packet somewhere?
There is a list. Grab this.
Just tell me what is, it's not page 11, so
I think it's not.
I'm sorry, page 9.
page 9,
Mhm.
okay. Sorry.
Yep.
I know, I was just looking, I was following her and it wasn't aligning.
Yeah, I'm
is all
sorry, I'm
saying.
sorry.
That's all right.
I was trying to do it from memory. I should not do that. Okay, so some ground rules for this evening, because we're hoping to have a lot of conversation. Silence the cell phones, honor the process, give space for other people to talk, and only one person talking at a time. Please no side conversations, because that can get distracting, and we have 3 tables set up for small group discussions, because we really want you to get to know each other, but also to make sure that we have all of this on the table, and we will have reporting out. So if there's a discussion in a small group, you can still share that with a larger group. So don't think that you won't be able to share all that information. And assume positive intent, that we're going to kind of go through this and we'll figure it out as we go. It's a process, right? And it's an iterative process. So this is the beginning. The CIA has to look at it. I'll come back to the Township Board. So when there's a public hearing, so we've got a lot of process yet ahead of us. So I'm going to talk about the development plan first. The agenda is really structured in two big chunks, the development plan and the TIF plan. The development plan contents by state law, and I included the legislation in your packets if you wanted it for reference. But I tried to summarize it so that you wouldn't go cross-eyed. I look at that, I'm like, what does that mean? But so kind of identifying the location of public facilities and public and private land uses, existing and proposed. So it is anticipatory that you can look at your future land use plan. You're trying to think about what kind of development improvements do we want to see? What are your anticipated changes, both from a land use standpoint, zoning, as well as streets? So there are major infrastructure changes that you're anticipating. So those are kind of the big contents that are pertinent for tonight's discussion. We can also take guidance from the powers of the authority board in the legislation. So it gives examples of things that the board can do. It can do an economic analysis. You can do long-range plans, market research, public relations campaigns, special events, improving land in public facilities, existing buildings, or multifamily developments. And there's a nuance there that we'll get into. You can do ADA improvements, acquire public facilities. So it gives you some kind of framework on what you're going to be doing. The other costs, there's other kind of batches that we have, things that you can also include when we're talking about those activities, such as site preparation, utilities and communication, streets and streetscapes, mobility, maintenance reserves, public amenities. So those are like the hard costs. And on your packet in the table, you'll see, I think it's 7 and 8. We'll see if I'm right. 6 and 7 and 8. There's a whole checklist. And it starts off with hard costs. It starts to identify the things that you can think about that you might want to think of. What would you use the money for as in the tax capture to apply into the district? So you have the hard costs, and then there's also soft costs. So the implementation of the CIA, your plan can be covered. Professional services, studies and plans. Some of those already mentioned. Administration, and then fees, permits, and insurance. So those are considered eligible costs that you could cover in your development plan. And I do want to point out really kind of where the public input opportunities are best at. Certainly when you do an infrastructure project, you want to have the community involved if you're going to do a new street, for example, or a major change to a street. But also studies and plans are really the best way that we're thinking about kind of what's that vision and where does that you have the biggest amount of support. And so studies and plans are really one of the best formats for the community engagement. And as we're getting those ideas, that can also go on the list, which is why it's important to think about this list as your starting place. We want to know what your priorities are, but it's okay not to have it all figured out. You don't have to do an itemized list of every single thing that's going to be included in your development plan. You want to be nimble, both because of the input that you might receive from the public, but also grant opportunities in the future. So you might have a funding opportunity you had never even anticipated. You want bigger buckets that are somewhat general to be able to say, that still meets our overall goals and vision, but it may be something that we hadn't anticipated. And then finally, some other eligible costs include demolition, lead asbestos abatement, property acquisition, facade improvements, and district maintenance. But there is a nuance there. I do want to mention that though. So you also have your other tools in the toolbox, such as brownfield. You also have your EDC, which currently supports facade grants and demolition for a portion of the corridor, but you could expand that program. You may not need to have that covered by the Corridor Improvement Authority. And then to also think about if these activities are happening on private property, they also need to be participating in the TIF district. So that's a different thing, right? So public facilities, the streets, sidewalks, parks, things that are always available to the public are public facilities, and that can be in your development area. There's nothing to extract from that from TIF because it's public. So that can be that's eligible, it can apply. But if you're gonna start putting money into private property, they need to also have the tax capture that comes with it. Yep. So we're gonna hustle through this because I know we have 2 hours and I want to leave a lot of room for discussion.
Dennis has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I know you, before you go on to this, I'm a little confused over the presentation material here. You have this table here and it's the infrastructure. It's page starting at 8, I believe. And you have a column, private allowable projects. And I'm a little confused whether you're talking about, when we're talking about projects, whether you're talking about the entire TIF area, if you're talking about the development area, or do we need to talk about those two separately and be cognizant of those?
I would not, tonight, we're not talking about private development projects.
Okay.
Wanted to show that those are things that are also eligible. If a developer or a piece of property is in the TIF district, then they can also, you could expend money on those for private interests.
Right, okay, thank you.
I have a question while we're stopped. The last part of what you just said, you said that if something's going to be expended for private development, then that has to have a TIF, it has to come from the TIF. Can you explain that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
The property needs to be in the TIF district.
Oh, the property needs to be in the TIF. Okay, yeah. I thought that it had something to do with, anyway. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, that concept is they're paying into the TIF and then they can benefit from the TIF.
Right. Yeah.
Right. If they're not in the TIF, then, I mean, unless you're doing grants or something else, but that's really not that's not the intent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So actually, we're going to break you guys up into small groups because what we want to know, our first goal tonight was to identify what you thought were the most important projects, things that are important to you, that you think are expenses that you would like to see be eligible, or the projects that we list on behalf of the township. So that's going to kind of start our discussion on what can we afford, how does it get implemented, all that.
I struggle with right now. Out of these kind of things, ever in this public setting, I'm not sure as I sit here today, I know what success looks like. I don't feel like I'm qualified to say, look at the gain a certain amount of tax revenue, or look at the gain a certain amount of new businesses to the market. You know, what does the public, what do they think success looks like with this program? And so it's really hard for me to go, oh, I'm going to go sit in a meeting and talk about what we need to do. But I have no idea what that discussion is taking us closer to our end goal or further away from our end goal, because I honestly don't know what our goal is. I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just trying to contribute in a positive way. And I don't have anything to put it up against other than I like it, which may or may not be something you like, or more importantly, the constituency that we represent.
No, that's a great question. That's a great question. And I think probably it's best answered by the township board, because you decided you wanted to create the corridor improvement authority, and there was a number of reasons why. The one piece I will answer is that in the community master plan, there is a lot of language about revitalization, particularly about the east side of West Saginaw. And what we heard from in the interviews from the board members, there was very similar comments as what you see in the master plan. So I know we can use that input from the public as kind of the starting point, is the need for investment and positive change.
And again, I apologize. I don't want to slow the process at all. I just want to make sure I'm a competent contributor. You know, how would we define that? At some point, we want to stimulate so many businesses. We want the average age of construction to be reduced by a number. You know, we want the tax revenue to go up. We want more people to move to the area. We want traffic to increase. It's just, I'm used to a world where I go, if we do that, will that happen? Or if we're trying to accomplish this, what must be true? And we can debate what must be true.
But then we all have to be accountable to the fact that, hey, we knew what we were shooting for. Did it happen? And I think that's the ultimate accountability that probably the board has every right to put in the CIA. The public has every right to put in all of us together.
And Suzanne, if I may, I think that as far as from the perspective of what success, I don't think that we have the complete answer. I think that's what this process is about, is engaging the public and seeing what the public would view as success. But there are some frameworks that we're hoping to work towards. One is you have a corridor that is visually attractive, that it looks good, it looks nice, traffic flows well. You got strong, vibrant businesses located along there. It's a place where people want to go. Now, exactly what does that look like? What types of businesses or anything? That's part of what we need this process, I believe, is to help determine that, what types of things do the public want to see? What would they like? What would be good? I know in similar areas over in Ingham County, they've done a lot of work on key corridors such as the Michigan Avenue corridor, where they've had studies done that engaged the public in having a lot of public sessions and shreds and things where people came and they gave their vision of what they wanted to see. And then they kind of came up with a plan towards what they want to move towards. Then it obviously becomes a longer process as you try to find investors who are willing to come and spend the money to, create that vision. But it's a process that we mean, as a board, both CIA and our board, we set up the framework to help that process of determining what's success and start moving us in that direction. So that's kind of what our role here is now, is not to decide on our own and know exactly what success is, but to help put the framework to lead to that success.
Yeah, Scott, I'd call that brainstorming.
Ken?
Yeah. Fonda?
I was just gonna say, I like Scott's question, and I get there, because my mind is the same way. I'm a Stephen Covey fan, start with the end in mind. So for me, it's what are the goals? So we know the area from Waverly to Broadbent. What do we want? What are we trying to attract new businesses? Are we trying to attract more traffic, more new customers, new clients? What are we trying to do? And then what does that look like? Once you figure out what we're trying to accomplish, then how do you get there? So I'm sort of with you, and I look forward to these engaging conversations to figure out what gap are we filling? What's the need?
Well, and I have a question about that because we're talking about putting the development plan together, and I've done research throughout this whole thing, talking to other people who serve on CIAs or have put together DDAs before. And I've heard anything from 1.5 years to 7 to 10 years to put together a CIA or a DDA, to put the plans together, to really start having that vision after studies, after public hearings and that sort of thing. Is there an average of how long? Because this feels really rushed. We don't have our goals. We don't know what the end is going to look like. We haven't had further public meetings. Do you have any sense of how long it should it be before we start putting things down on paper and committing to it?
I think it just really depends on the community. And I think one of the challenges, and I totally appreciate this discussion, is how do you show the public action and that you're listening? And how do you engage them in that goal setting or desired outcomes while you're setting it up and you're presuming to know what the projects are going to be, which is a challenge. At the same time, the benefit of setting the CIA up is that you can pay for a quarter plan. You can pay for that and it's not coming out of the general operating fund, which enables you then to have those discussions with the public. It also, as the coffers build, allows you to do instant implementation. Because even a transportation project could take 3 years, but if you want enhancements along that transportation corridor, you need to be able to tell MDOT you've got money in the game to be able to do those additional investments. And that could be a long timeline. So there's some things you could probably presume to guess, that there's been discussions with MDOT about potentially boulevarding the corridor. So that's a big ticket item. But knowing that you have funding lined up to make it happen, then you can start talking about, well, what do we want? Do we want benches? Do we want decorative lighting? What are some of these things that we think are important for the corridor? And you have the money, you can actually do it. And so that's a tricky thing, because when people say it's 7 years or 5 years, if they're setting it up and they're doing a plan process first, and then they're kind of figuring out, they have to collect those monies to build it up to do a major project before they can go do that implementation. So I actually favor this approach from the standpoint, I know it feels like a shot in the dark, but you're also, when we get into that TIF capture and the number of years, there's only so much money in the pot. So you always can revise your development plan once you have a better sense of what the public is telling you and what those projects are, because you only have a set dollar amount. So in some ways, this is sort of speculative as far as kind of what do we think it's going to be. But it does start to kind of say, if you think a plan is important based on this discussion, then let's pencil in a plan. If we know we're going to do a boulevard, then let's pencil in the boulevard. And there might be a couple things though, based on tonight's discussion, that you say, I hadn't thought about that. It'd be good just to kind of identify that something as a placeholder for now, knowing that we can modify it later. I think it's exciting to be able to have the resources to go and do it once you've asked the public, because it builds public confidence in the process and in the decision makers, because you're getting things done.
So would it be proper for us to produce a development plan out of this process that is just asking for studies for incremental steps toward potentially some projects in the future?
You absolutely could.
Okay.
The concern, you want to be more ambitious with your development plan and think pretty big, because it's going to depend on the tax capture that how you're going to take those monies. And that's where that term of the number of years and goes, how far you go out, because that'll depend on how much money you get to do the things that you want. So it's hard to do that, but I think it's going to be a good dialogue as we play it out tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Do we know the schedule that MDOT set forth for broadband to Waverly? Have they developed any type of 5-year plan, 10-year plan that would help the team here?
I'm me to take that. So MDOT has two sets of plans. One is from the freeway to Broadbent for boulevarding. That is likely to come quicker within, I believe it's the next 5 years, 2026. And I believe that they already have funding for that obligated. And I'm not exactly sure how that funding works internally in the MDOT. For the rest of the corridor, from the freeway all the way to Waverly, they do have some scoping documents for boulevarding the rest of Saginaw, and it scores very, very highly in their internal scoring mechanisms at the state. Unfortunately, they do not have funding for that piece of it. So that is likely, I asked them for a timeline. They really have not wanted to put a lot of information out on that, but because they were working to try to figure out, timing on that and where they could find some dollars at this point. It's a very similar cost to the 496 project, so it's not inexpensive, but it scores very highly in their scoping. My guess is that would probably be a decade. They said they know the Saginaw Highway is getting close to needing reconstruction. So it will be coming into the future. So as Suzanne said, this is kind of an optimal time to get in front of some of that planning. They only have it kind of scoped. They have not at least for this section, had extensive planning. We've seen some of the concepts for the freeway to broadband piece of it, but it's a good time to kind of get in at the beginning with MDOT to help kind of portray our vision and have them work it into their design work.
Particularly related to non-motorized, I'll just throw in there, because MDOT will say this is our project and they'll try to accommodate to a certain degree, but their standard might be a 5-foot sidewalk. And they'll say, well, if you want 12 feet, so you can also do a path, along with the sidewalk, well, then you're gonna have to pitch in the extra to make that happen because this is our standard. So that's where if you want the additional enhancements and you want to take advantage of the construction opportunity to save money rather than installing things later, that's where the benefit is being right in at the very beginning. You can start to influence that change, but it will cost.
Andrea?
Brian, if I can ask a couple questions regarding that. So with MDOT, you mentioned, and I'm not sure if which segment, or if you were talking about the entire corridor scoring high. And if that was just freeway to Broadbent or it included freeway to Waverly. And can you just share a little bit about what factors score well, why the project scores well?
Sure, and I don't know, maybe Tony might have more information on how I don't have a lot of information on how it scores. I'm assuming it has to do with safety and the level of traffic. And Rachel may have some background in that too. That I'm just mainly repeating what they've told us, and that both sections scored very highly. The broadband to the freeway portion has funding obligated towards it. The other section, it scored highly, which they said it's in their system. Everybody thinks, hey, it's a great project, but there's no funding attached to it. So
I believe it's a part of their operational template, what they're calling. So looking at the traffic volumes, looking at the dedicated right of way out there. I've heard of boulevard section, but operationally trying to control some of the access is very important. With the growth, potential growth out there. So looking at all those facets, I think that's why the broadband, the freeway section probably made it into the 2026 call for projects. They're actually in the process of developing their 2027 call for projects now. So they're looking for that next crop. So that's a yearly thing that they do.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes if you have money, if the local jurisdiction has money as a match, it bumps it up.
Absolutely.
and it is when we talk about one of the projects is the corridor improvement study, and I know like the regional manager, the TSC manager, he was excited about the potential of the CIA. So he said, well, we would need to be involved with that in the beginning, which I think right now we have a great window of opportunity because our TSC has been very good to work with in the past. Sometimes that's not as easy to work with, and you want to really try to get in the beginning to help exert some influence on the design. They want to be involved and make sure it works, contextually sensitive design for what the community wants.
Sure, and it seems if we've already, if MDOT's already kind of done an analysis from that context, we don't have to kind of start from scratch. We can just maybe look at additions or enhancements to what they've already kind of reviewed and analyzed.
I will put a little asterisk next to that though. Sometimes there might be something that you're asking for that's not in their scope.
Right.
So if you wanted, and I don't even know if it's feasible, but I'll just put it something crazy. Like if you wanted a mid-block crossing, and you wanted something, a hawk signal that has a beacon, and you wanted additional enhancements to make that pedestrian crossing safe. They may say, well, that's not in our thing. And so you may need to make the case for it on your side of it.
Just a thought, look at the whole corridor, something for the breakouts is I heard a lot about non-motorized. So to incorporate, for an example, a cycle track, for an example, up and down the corridor. That might be something that I'll want to think about. Aesthetic design plans, right? So aesthetically pleasing, incorporating that into a project could save dollars. The board could help facilitate a study, that will be consistent throughout the corridor, but that can be one of the first projects you do.
Yeah, experience with this. And I think it's a great idea, but is that kind of structure typically primary goal to control traffic?
In this particular project, yes.
I was sitting in the restaurant
Yep.
yesterday, 2 accidents. happened
Yep.
while I was
Yeah,
in the
the
restaurant.
safety is a big
So
one.
Absolutely.
I get that part. I just wanted to.
Yep.
And then is there inherent upkeep costs that become a local burden if all of a sudden you now have a green space?
There would be a maintenance agreement that the township would work out with them. That's typical.
Yep. So for example, the East Belt line, over on the edge of Cascade, there's a maintenance agreement with the township for the landscaping and the trees that are there. So it depends on the enhancements that you want.
We have an agreement right now, the sidewalk that went in when they redid this part of Saginaw that put the sidewalk under 9669. We agreed to mow, our township mows that and takes care of that.
And so that could be an eligible cost, right? You could pay for that.
Well, and I'm thinking too, if MDOT's already looked at boulevarding, the east end, from the freeway east. Opportunity, I know there are a couple of us at least that would love to see utilities put underground on the east side of the township. And so with that work, and especially if there's a boulevard, you create kind of that space and opportunity for that work to happen concurrently.
So that's why we wanted to have this brainstorming, kind of the list, so that you can identify what the projects are. Utilities are a great example that burying utilities is ridiculously expensive. Even if you're tearing out the entire road and you're like, there's a hole, all you have to do is drop it in. They don't care. They're still like, oh, it's still $1 million a block to bury it. So knowing what those priorities are for all of you, and as you think through that helps with the costing. So that when we're thinking about how much money might be available, what might those projects be, we can add that reality on timeline and cost and all that. So that's kind of the thought for tonight. So
Unfortunately, the cost is it's the material that shoots it up because overhead is a lot cheaper than underground.
yeah. Although out west now in California, I just heard they're going to bury 10,000.
There are.
That's crazy. All right, so let's go into small groups. We don't just spend a lot of time on this. I'd like to be done at the top of the hour with this exercise if it's possible. I don't know if it is. I'll let you all talk and then talk as a group and kind of brainstorm. And then if there's anything that you don't see in the tables or the lists that have been prepared, we can always write on the sheets that are up there. I'll be handing out dots so that you can dot vote your priorities, but please don't use more than one dot on one item. So don't load it up with 5 dots on one item. So that's the only rule.
That's cute.
So what we're gonna do is you'll talk, identify what you think, and then when we get close to 7 o'clock, you'll just kind of individually, you can walk up and put dots on the sheet. Just so we kind of we know generally where you think most of the money should go into what pot, if it's infrastructure, if it's plans, kind of what those priorities are, that will help us kind of create a project list.
So in these small groups, we're not looking for the group to come up with a list of 5. We're just discussing it, then everybody individually will testify.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then we can talk about it for a couple of minutes after it's been put up. Okay, so there's 3 different tables. Ideally, we would have Corridor Improvement Authority members and Township Board members blended. And I won't make you number off or anything like that. I think you can all figure it out.
Those card tables.
Yeah, they were. One over there. The cookie table will go first.
Whatever. That's one of your mark. Comes after.
And when you sit down, if you could please share your name, again, so that we're tying people together.
I'm just giving them what I was before. These people, it's like they're just famous. And we have a big infrastructure bill coming.
Yeah.
We can make this happen.
It's gonna turn east west. And then we're right there. So since we already have that, it makes the same to me, it makes a lot of sense to do connector path, so to speak, from Saginaw to eventually actually lay them Sharp Park and over. With that connector, you would actually be able to go down he's like on his home. Deep into the city. So that project will treat well, almost, yeah. Right now that goes to Sexton, but it's not to say that Ingham or the city couldn't go farther. Yes. I'm talking about.
I think obviously, yeah, so the boulevards are designed.
I would say yes, right now, if we had 50.
It really, to me, it really aligns closely with the work we just did. Those bike lanes on Well, combination that when it's 10 foot wide, it's really multi-bike that you walk. So this is just like the halfway region walk locally. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to see that. She was up there, not.
Yes, yes.
On the east-west pathway, they're not supposed to be.
So I just want to make sure that I understand.
No,
Maybe when they were discussing.
it's not. Yes, it is. Well, yeah, they are, because it goes, I don't know how far, on the map, it like this jacket. Well, the tip doesn't have anything to do with The tip is just. But you get to spend it.
But I just thought I was just like, it's administrative. Yes.
No, it has to be in the residential area. You can't,
Right.
if you were doing private, if you were doing private, that project is not private. So let's say if we wanted to do the water bill, right, the water bill area, and we wanted to do something with it, we would just.
Which I think the majority of something like this, but.
More the direction that there's a section of Grand River Township looks kind of like Saginaw. I mean, they're begging for this right now. For that plan across that. It's making it look like a now that's all. Moving forward, it's got slow bars. You can get a building. Our study really important to more of the direction I think streetscaping obviously is important.
Well, I think we need the corner study, yes.
I'm talking about transit ADA. You're talking about some type of
It depends. If you look at the map, it's there very.
There's a.
Right, we have that. Yeah. Well, but it's several years old. Right. So if you see it,
That's why I'm
Okay.
This is the chart.
How far?
Any given spot?
Yes.
I don't know that,
Okay.
I don't know that we know that. I'm supporting the planning study. No, a forward planning study of like what could, where you have a consultant that's having the charrettes and that kind of stuff where you hear what do our residents want that order to be and what do you want it to look like. Yeah. And then we did one for, we paid with Heinz to do one for Saginaw. When
residential living population right there.
oh, yes, they did one, yes, they did. I thought you were talking about that.
I guess the question. But that's still gonna be a priority. So.
Yeah. I know Paul.
Did you come up with that?
Types of business. West Highway. The lot size, the density, the depth. Yeah, and then they talk about things out here, west of the highway, like maybe.
So we need 20 grand.
It was really more of
Nobody ever worried
a
about
business.
I'm talking
I'm talking about.
So we're looking more like.
Because all of us
talking about what we are.
Yeah, it could be all of those. It could pick any of those.
But
But that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, that would, I mean, that's a lot of different. Well, so don't some already go into.
Well, I think just as far as, yeah, obviously there will be more, but as far as placing that important.
Well, that's what we're talking about. With the top, the very first bullet. Yeah, that page right there. I mean, I would like, I'm supporting the whole idea when we first started this piece. Dennis was.
Especially lighting. No, fancy lighting, more nicer brick and stuff like that. It's always.
Basically, east of priority because it's the challenge. And then
I'm assuming that, but I don't know. I'm assuming.
so I have always wanted like, you know, and everything, I mean, some beautification stuff. Suzanne? The, you know.
So if we wanted like a target market analysis for housing, if you wanted to encourage residential. So when I had a project where we did a target market analysis
Well,
for
actually, I guess
housing, and then the developers were able to use that study
The top ones are
to
for.
literally say, see, there's space in the house. And so then they could get support from the this is your project. So it might be a retail analysis. Like, do you have too much or too little security? Too much retail corridor? Or what other business opportunities might you have? Or are there certain market segments you're missing out on leakage? Like let's say you didn't have like a hardware store. And it showed like everybody's money was going over to Lansing. Going to someplace else.
He doesn't live there. We never had talent.
So it's going someplace else, then you know, well, we want to recruit this kind of business because all this money is leaving our corridor. Do some of these studies overlap with some of this studies and plans? So you can sometimes right, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, they can, you can combine them or they can be added.
Okay, a DDA is, the Downtown Development Authority is really for more financial. But is that correct, more financial development?
This is pretty much just like a DDA.
Okay, that's what I know.
Yeah.
Where they evolve over the years.
Yeah, the language is very much.
Yeah, some are very, I'm not very sure how that's.
All right, you can start putting your dots up, you know. If there's other ideas you did not see, you can grab the marker right next to the board and write them up there too. It doesn't. So if you find everybody's phone over there, you can just add.
They have spurs. Yeah, you take the road or sidewalk. So they have like a main, all these spurs.
I think that social
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I just want you to know.
Yeah, get one closer. I thought this was a little bit more descriptive than the other one, so I thought that would be.
No, you can.
Yeah, vote for that one.
So Suzanne, so tell me again, what's the totality, like what's the whole? Township is, basic foundation, these are the things, right? Like they'll have to come, what else?
So usually it's only a component, right? This is like the miscellaneous to run. You might have like design requirements, design standards. You're putting in a plan that serves as the foundation for.
Got it back on schedule. Got it.
Yeah.
You might say, you really want to study this particular intersection. So you're very recommendations. That really could be any.
Yeah. Closing on it. Right.
You could roll it all up, it's the, it does get me like a branding.
Right.
Animal and but like on, like I had one in Michigan where, you know, like the parks and rec announced residential.
It's gross under a mask. I'm like, ooh,
This, you can have to bring that in. Like, how do they do it?
Ken, are you doing
or the rest is mailing out for schedule like 24. Right now,
So. But then like, it's like, you do that with me, with all the.
Like mask gas.
So that is like. Decided for.
Yeah, yeah, right.
We did like that images.
I can't. It's the sick.
Imagery. This.
Yeah, it's too bad.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can lay your, those would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we go? No spot.
I've been thinking about it.
Available for me.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, is that okay?
Yes, you can.
You're an official.
Thank you. And I'm like, I don't want to ask the
You're so
stash.
Yeah. The, yeah.
Thank you.
There's a priority, we didn't see a priority list listed on there.
You can, sure, if you want. Go back, you can go back to your spot.
Sorry, did you debrief?
You gotta recommend travel. Where are these?
I wish we had the history that they have.
You promised. I'll drop it.
They're in the back. We have. Yes. So I think- I know. Oh my gosh. I used to think about having to do this in the communities outside of Lansing and East Lansing. When I was out in Williamson and Riverville and Mason Stockton. It was great fun. Oh. So my big question is, again, when they start talking about all these plans and stuff, it's like, we haven't seen them. I haven't
All right,
seen them.
let's spend a couple of minutes just reporting out. So, because we didn't do a big group discussion, but. Okay.
I know. But you know, like the board has been obviously doing this for a little bit longer. And what they've been working on, it would have been nice to hear, like, if they had to prioritize, what is theirs? Show us something, like, I'd love to see some of the things that they've talked about. Show those videos, you know, slides, or whatever.
I didn't realize that that
Because we can
was
kind of know,
kind of
you know, follow that.
where they are on the boulevard.
Gives us an idea of who's here, there, or
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that there was gonna be.
how easy the process is going to be if we change it, if we want to go with it.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's just, you know, when Brian said that the whole thing is ready to be replaced, it's like, didn't they just repave that? It seemed like it was just
Although
like.
I always say that, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, that was 15 years ago. It's like, no way. And it feels like it was just a few years.
And Brian was saying, well, it hasn't happened during my tenure, and it's like, really? I thought it was like a couple of years.
I do that all the time. I was doing it, and I was thinking about like further east of Lansing on Saginaw, and I'm like, oh yeah. That was back when my son, who was, I don't even know, 9 years out of high school, was a freshman, so. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes a little more sense like that.
So you're all put together.
It's like, okay, it has been a little longer than I realized, but.
And when they last did Saginaw, too, it was obviously just a top coat of asphalt. They didn't rebuild that, right?
Yeah, it still just keeps it thinking like, oh, we're redoing that.
Yeah, it's back there.
Yeah, it's been that long.
Especially on that, so, you know, what they do Saginaw, I think it's already being discussed, but, you know, as Brian said, you know, I don't know if they're talking about that date, it's still gonna be a while yet.
Right.
She looks like.
Well, you know, it's interesting though.
Okay.
I mean, I'm assuming they want a boulevard because it's gotta be a lot safer
Good thing, yeah.
having the boulevard.
But I've not,
than
I mean,
trying to turn left, you know, all the traffic and, you know,
I don't.
broadband. Now we're. So it just is like. Maybe they just made it, like they push it back on that a lot. I saw this, I don't know.
Yeah, well, when they repaved, if you remember, they put in these little things to try to stop people, and not a full boulevard, but they put in those little cement things to try to keep people from turning in the places that they were going fast. So that tells me that if they're gonna totally rebuild it, they're gonna want a good boulevard to make sure that people are going what they're supposed to do.
It'd be nice just get a little more green space first there too, so.
You gotta have some pedestrian safety.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think everybody's back now.
Great.
Oh, hold it. Which one?
So,
Standing behind
so I roughly counted up the ones that are on the other sheets. I will kind of roll those into the bigger categories, but clearly planning was the #1 item on the list. Non-motorized improvements. I think almost tie the boulevard design. So very clear on kind of that direction. Had also some votes for art and public space. That was not initially on the planning commission list. So that's super helpful to inform kind of other things that we want to be thinking about. So that's great. What are your thoughts? What did you guys talk about?
We can't tell you.
We referred a lot to the strategic planning that we did earlier this year and how these kinds of things fit into the 5-year plan overall for the township as well.
Oh, that's great. And then would we want to translate some of the stuff from your 5-year plan into the development plan?
Well, I think the 5-year plan, it has the broad categories and doesn't have the specific projects. So I think that would go hand in hand, both of these.
Right.
That's the best point. I found that very helpful. I don't know if that's something that could be shared, but that helps me define scope and vision of the work that you've already done to try to narrow down priorities. What I used to do for large companies was consult and do strategic planning too, but so it was very helpful for me, but it speaks to my language and gave me a better sense of the scope of, oh, okay, now I get it. Work about these were the 5 priorities. We intellectually debate that, but at least place to start. And I thought it was good work.
Yeah, I think Brian's staff are working on putting that together. Didn't you say that, Brian, earlier?
Yeah, so we've had the initial brainstorming, strategic planning with the board, and now our staff will be going back and putting it into a document, but also working with department heads to build out all those objectives and specific type projects and that type of thing under it, or at least guidance, maybe not always specific projects, but build that out more to bring back to the board. So.
And I think at our table, I believe it was unanimous that we felt very strongly about having engagement with our community and input from the residents. It was almost difficult to start this process for us because we wanted to hear from them. We want to do something that they want us to do. Although we probably will have to tailor it a little differently because we understand the ins and outs of municipalities, but we really felt like, God, we're missing that piece.
But for the reason that I think that's so important is you could have conflicting ideas that you need to help, broaden people's perspective on. So they may want parks and recreation, and we may decide that we can't get to parks and recreation until we increase the revenue. We just have to have a better revenue stream and better tax base. But if we can then tell that story and say, we're trying to attract these businesses, create this revenue, we can build your parks, maybe it would help them go, oh, you did hear us, not just, we told you we wanted parks and you attracted Amazon.
And I'll just add to that comment. I think it's helpful for us to kind of have some ideas that we put out to the public and to residents to react to. And I think helping them as well understand kind of the constraints of what the purpose of the CIA is. Because to your point, there may be residents that want parks and rec, and that doesn't really fall into the purpose of what the CIA is established for, and helping them understand the kind of secondary benefits like you mentioned. But I think it's really helpful for residents to kind of be able to respond and react. And so if we can give them kind of some ideas of what we're thinking about for the corridor and the investments and changes that we can make that we believe will benefit the community, and then get that feedback, I think probably is a more effective way to engage residents. It's just hard to start from scratch and get them to come up with a plan.
I would agree. It's much less frustrating for residents who have no concept of what it is that we can do with this. And they put out all the ideas that are not on the list and not possible. And then we shoot them all down. So it's because they're not legal. I think it's better to have a framework that they can react to and expand and give some insight to.
I think that balance is good, that you need to have that, because sometimes I know I've heard from residents that I'm not going to chime in because you've already made up your mind on what you want to do. So I just want to avoid that from happening by having this balance of maybe putting out some ideas, but letting them know there's no final decision. We welcome your input, your ideas, your thoughts, because they're going to come up with some good stuff too. So I like the balance.
Yeah,
of the
they
two.
came up with Mount Park. Sports fields.
No comment.
Well, they came up, that did,
I wasn't
it was
here at
the
the
need
time,
of
so I don't
sports
know.
fields, that was a big part that that people said they wanted, so it was.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't on the board at the time.
I'm a
we've
big
done these,
planning
actually.
fan, so
Yeah, but
we can
there's
talk
more
planning all day
ideas.
long. There is a community wisdom though, that they can't put their finger on, like if something's wrong, they can't put their finger quite on it, but if you go, you mean this? No, yes, that's what it is. So, but people also intuitively know. There was a tree canopy study we had done. We asked the public just cold, identify streets that we need more street trees on. And it matched this whole detailed map that, we had paid lots of money to do, but it matched up because they just know. So it's always good for that double check and always good to find it. So planning is on the top of your list. So we'll make sure that there's enough money to do some robust planning. We also had the question about, a market analysis or economic, study, and all those can also be wrapped up into a planning process. So they're not, you don't have to think of them as individual. We can roll them and bundle them so that if you're going through that process and asking for public input, it's not just on one thing. You could do many things all at the same time.
And Suzanne, one of the things we discussed in our group that I think is important to make sure we have on the table is, it's a little bit of we have to prioritize, but when we say, okay, only five things can be selected, obviously there's more things that we're going to want to have in this development plan. And we need to remember that we're not constrained by what you have in your development plan in terms of what you want, just only by revenue that potentially comes from a TIF. You have a vision for what you want there. As we were discussing, geez, do we really need to keep $20,000 for easement? Can't we out of the general fund that? And the answer is yes. There's obviously other revenue sources to do other things that are in that plan. If you want a pathway, if you want whatever, that we can, find other sources, but it's definitely part of what we want to accomplish in this corridor, but everything doesn't necessarily have to be funded by the TIF. And I think that's an important distinction to make, so we don't have to narrow everything we want down to just a teeny tiny list.
Yeah, that's very true. And for this exercise really just helps us understand emphasis. Kind of where would we want to really make sure that we've got enough in there that you really feel like you can get something accomplished. So, and certainly that'll be dependent on input you receive as well. Let's move on to the TIF plan. And in the TIF plan, basically it's revenues and expenditures, right? That's and how you're going to use it for how long. That's your TIF plan. So it's kind of your that's all it is. So I mean, it complements, and what you see most often is the development and TIF plan are one and the same. And so in this case, you're going to be able to talk about, these are our projects that we would like to do in the development plan. And this is where the money is going to come from for them, and how we're going to spend it. So I will put a big caveat on this, that as we're talking about numbers and the TIF plan, it really also is dependent too on the participation of the other taxing jurisdictions. So you do, when you capture that increment, you are capturing not only Delta Township monies, you're capturing library revenue, you're capturing money from the county and LCC. So they have to participate and agree to participate in the Corridor Improvement Authority. So that's something that when we're coming up with this list and we're coming up with these anticipated revenues, I just wanted to put that there because we still have to honor the process and go to them and talk to them and make sure that they're in mutual agreement with what the process is going to be and how much money they would be receiving. So this picture was provided to the township board in one of the presentations when we started talking about the development plan and TIF plan. And the discussion about corridor improvement authority really came from the Delta Crossings project that you see being developed on the other side of the highway. And the theory and the discussion at the time, and certainly the township board can weigh in, was that the Delta Crossings project would be the TIF. That monies collected from Delta Crossings would then both assist the developer as well as the corridor on public facilities. So no tax capture from any other property owner but Delta Crossings. So that was the original discussion. So I want to honor that, but I also wanted to make sure that we were having this discussion about that geography in the TIF area to make sure that we were setting this correctly as we were doing it. If that's the case, so one example is you might have you have a public facility, which is the lift station further to the south. You know, so you might capture the money from Delta Crossings and pay for public infrastructure someplace else. So something as sexy as a lift station could even get funding. But it could be your boulevard or your plans or anything else that we've identified. Another idea that's out there is you could also look at the corridor and think about the three big properties. Depending on kind of what kind of development you wanted and whether or not you wanted to capture the taxes for that, kind of thinking in the future and what that might look like. And then another scenario would be the entire corridor. And then it would apply to anyone you're capturing from the entire area. In looking at the numbers from the assessor though, there has been a decline in the tax revenue along the eastern portion of the corridor. And so the tax capture for the rest of the eastern portion, it would only be like the increment increased by $30,000 last year. So in that case, you have to question whether or not it's worth the administrative costs of trying to do all of the TIF and manage all of that for every single property, and then whether or not that return is worth it to be able to do that. So that's where the project list comes in, is if you have a private developer that wants to pay for a new street, or they want to pay for something on their property, maybe they want to seek a reimbursement for you, maybe they want to build a bigger building and put in an elevator instead of just having stairs. You can do that under building code under certain circumstances. So that would be kind of, if you're thinking about how to, facilitate that, you might want to think about it. But I just kind of mentioned that, saying it's an option. And there might be another configuration that you can think of. But as we were talking about what might be some of those scenarios, it was really Delta Crossings only. It was, maybe the big three parcels that you have, or maybe the entire district. And so I don't know if you want to talk in small groups about this, or if you want to talk in general as a larger group, we could do that too, because it seems like it's a pretty discrete discussion.
Right. I think we should discuss a little bit here. Mary, you had a question.
Well, I just have a clarity question. So I just want to go on record. I have no support to give to tax capture on the entire corridor. For all the reasons you said, for me, the CIA is about enhancing that eastern part of the township, the corridor, and that's what drives me to support it. So I don't want to end up spending more money to collect itty bits of money from that part of the township. But could we do a TIF potentially with the Delta Crossings property? And then at some point in the future, if there was a development of interest for the Mike Guide property on Kreitz and Saginaw, then that could become a different TIF with different parameters. And then likewise, if someone were to actually buy the mall that wanted to do something productive with it, we could work and do a TIF for some major rework or reuse, redevelopment, however you want to describe it, of the mall. So we don't have to decide now, we want to hit those 3 major properties and create a TIF that's here and here and here. We can do one, add one, not add one, add one. Is that correct?
Yes, you could do that. The question would be from setting the initial project list for the development plan and the expected tax capture. Kind of what that pot would look like. Kind of
And
what
it
are
could
some
have
of the
different
assumptions?
parameters. The TIF could be totally different parameters in either of those, any of the 3, correct? They do
Yeah.
not have to mirror each other.
They don't have to be, your TIF agreements can be different for the
Yes.
properties.
Okay.
Suzanne, to that point, if I can ask a kind of follow-up question related to that, because I was thinking of, along the same lines, but my question is with the Ide property, I mean, is it not possible someone could purchase that property and do a development without really much notice to us? And I suppose there are probably permits in that we need, but is there any reason that we should try to create a TIF more immediately, even before a development project is there, so that we have that in place? So if something happens, we're kind of locked in to capture any value of investment on that property, given it's vacant.
That's correct.
So is there a reason we might want to create a TIF before there's a project there?
Because the question is, they would probably come to you for a TIF if they're seeking reimbursement. The question is if they already have a project, whether or not all of a sudden you can put them in a TIF. So they may say, no, we don't need to be in a TIF. We're good. We have our performer works just fine. We don't need to be reimbursed for our infrastructure. We don't need to do that kind of agreement.
Because doesn't the developer have to be a partner in a TIF? I mean,
I don't,
I guess that's my clarity. You can just say, oh no, we're gonna take part of your.
yeah.
You can set the TIF on your own. The balance there is that on those bigger parcels, ideally, you've got tools with your brownfield that you can layer with that. The brownfield sometimes works in conflict with the TIF.
But can
Right.
you retroactively, let's use the Mike Ide property, for example, on Kreitz and Saginaw. So we do a TIF there. And we don't do any, in that TIF, we do no developer reimbursement, no developer capture. So we've set the TIF, we say, developer, you're on your own. We're just gonna take part of the tax.
Yes.
Then you don't go back and the developer says, but I need some help here. You already have a TIF. Is it possible to throw that TIF out and do a new one that accommodates the developer? I'm trying to understand why you would do a TIF before you knew what was gonna happen.
I'm gonna call my friend Eric Helzer because he does, I'm familiar with these. Eric is the expert on the ins and outs of the developer side of this. So I will let Eric.
I just want to know legally,
Yeah.
can you, because you said a TIF with no developer having any benefit, so to speak, with public infrastructure or whatever.
And especially if there's nothing on the land right now, so you're not
I'm
gonna be
trying to
drawing
understand
any
why you would
huge
put a
revenue.
TIF
Well,
where
but then
there
when
is
it's
nothing and
developed,
you know not
it's
what's
already
going
in
to
place.
happen.
But right
So
now, it's
maybe
just
you make
dirt.
$2 this year, but then it's developed and next year you make 200 grand, you know?
Well, it
because
depends on whether or not you want to assist a developer in any capacity. That's what I'm trying to.
So
Identify.
I'm gonna let Eric.
Yeah, let me step back a second and try to help
Mhm.
clarify. I understand the conflict here. I think that's what's going on. So think of this plan. There's a cost side. Okay, there's a cost side for township projects and potential costs for developer projects. All right. All related to infrastructure improvements. It doesn't matter because it's an eligible cost. You don't have to support the private cost.
Right.
You can only need to support the township portion, okay? So the advantage on vacant land, putting a vacant land parcel in today is you have the base value today. It's not going to go negative, unlike other parcels like the mall, which go negative. And you are only capturing the gain. So you have a development plan, which is everything you see there on the screen. You could have your TIF capture be just the I parcel and the Delta Crossings parcel. Could be those two parcels from a capture standpoint. But you don't have to give any of the revenue generated, I'm going to pick on the I parcel, to the I parcel at all. So by putting it in today, you have a lot of benefit. You've gone through the public process once. You've established this plan once. You don't have to do an amendment to the plan, which means going back out to all the taxing jurisdictions. Another major issue is resetting the base. And so if you decide to add in new parcels later and not today, from a TIF capture standpoint, it's going to be the base down the road. And if they've started construction, if they've done anything, there's no loss. And I'm sitting back here listening, I'm going, put the vacant land in, put the vacant land in, because it's not hurting you at all.
But you haven't really answered my question,
Okay.
which is, if we do vacant land today, not really today, but you understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
in this present moment.
Correct.
And in 5 years, a developer wants some assistance and wants some benefit of the TIF, can you go back and change the parameters of the TIF that you put on that property?
You won't need to, and here's why. You're identifying this activity list. Okay, there's two activity lists essentially there now. There's what we can do for private and what the township's priorities are. What you did, this exercise you just went through. Okay, so you don't have to amend the TIF plan to give any benefit to that property. It's already in the plan. It's in the development plan. It's in the area. So there's no amendment needed. They have, the developer of that parcel, the I parcel, would have to petition the CIA board and ask for assistance. Where you're capped, however, is the dollar amount that's set in the TIF plan. So I'm just going to pick on numbers because I know the numbers, I'm going to be talking about them a little bit. So let's just say the number is 20 million in the TIF plan today. If that developer comes in and there's not 20 million available because you set that limit, then we have to amend the plan. We have to amend it to a higher level, a higher number. So everything that's going to be in the plan are estimates based on two categories right now: Delta Crossings parcel and all of the township projects. Whatever that total that you agree to is the total. If another developer comes in and wants infrastructure improvements on the I parcel, and they're adding 5 million or 10 million to that pot, you might not have the ability to give it because you've set a cap. So in most TIF plans, we don't get so hung up on the dollar amount because that's controlled to the developer in the reimbursement agreement, and the developer reimbursement agreement after the TIF plan's approved. That sets the cap that you give to any particular private developer. The township's never capped. So if the developer doesn't spend all that money, the township can even get that access to that surplus money. So caps that are set in a plan trigger that. But if we set a higher cap without committing, we're not committing to anybody, it gives you that flexibility without having to do all the amendments.
So who approves the second parcel? We're using the I property as an example. So the CIA has the ability to say, we're going to do a 20 million, we're going to give you a 20 million capture.
So long as it's within the willing, you're always capturing, let's assume we're capturing from the I parcel. You're always capturing, but you're not expending on it.
But I think you're missing my point. So the board gives up any control then of whether or not another TIF.
I don't believe so. I
Well, that's
believe
my
from the
question.
meeting,
So
you can set that. And what most boards do is the CIA would accept an application of sorts, a petition, and they would have to bring it to the township board, those township board members. And I believe also, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, from earlier meetings that we had at the end of last year, We talked about, once we get to the agreement standpoint, that it is the CIA board that will review and accept and recommend to the township board, but it's ultimately the township board that would enter into the agreement. Or approve it for the CIA to sign. I think the township board was ultimately going to be the governing body.
That's correct.
Okay,
But so when we talked about the development
so there's your
plan,
control.
when we talked about the development plan, and the development plan has to also identify potential change, right, and future uses. And so you could look at the master plan and the zoning ordinance and anticipate the density of development, you know, how much change you would expect on the vacant parcel, which could give you some clues as to kind of if you wanted to have a higher number, you know, what kind of development, what kind of typical request might you see on that property? It would be a guess because you wouldn't know what they were planning on doing, but that future development, that's why.
And that's on the cost side.
Yeah.
But we'll have to do the same thing on the taxable value side. We'll have to project it, whether it's a 20, 25, whatever the year is of the TIF plan. And I can work with Ted, your assessor, on those projections. We could say, okay, well, this is zoned, you know, for X. We've seen plans and their concept plans for Y. The type of use that would go there, the taxable value would range from here to here, and pick a number. Everything that we put in this development and TIF plan are estimates. Even the Delta Crossings project is an estimate. It's only planned out through formally through phase 2 and phase 3. And we've projected those remaining phases. We could project the same thing for the I parcel. So we have to project cost and we can project taxable value. So that allows us to project a higher capture and a higher cost and sets those caps. So we never have to go back out through a public process, but it is all still managed here with these two groups and bodies. There's no rubber stamp. Once the development and TIF plan are approved, it's a up to amount and it sets goals and objectives that you work towards. And then you continue to work that TIF plan.
Gary has something he wants to interject.
Just for informational purposes, you know, that I parcel is governed by consent judgment. And so what can be built there is dictated by the consent judgment. So those numbers,
We can project those.
those numbers are fairly easy to arrive at because we know how many residential units can be built there. We know the exact acreage of commercial that can be built on. We know the acreage that's in the 100 years, you know, we know.
It's even better.
Based on that consent judgment, what can be done.
Okay, thank you.
That actually makes it much easier.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't realize that.
But to change the increment, because if you're gonna put the parcel in, then remember we said that LCC and, you know, all the, you gotta go back to them then if it's not in at the beginning, because you've expanded the geography, now you've gotta go back and renegotiate with those other entities.
And if they don't agree, what?
Then the only tax capture that happens is your own.
Okay.
Ted wanted to add something.
I just wanted to point out too, that property happens to have a huge gap between its current assessed value and taxable value, like several $1 million. So if it transfers ownership from Mr. I's estate to whomever, it becomes uncapped. So if it was in the district before that, that would be a huge, it's probably $4 million of taxable value difference.
With nothing getting built.
That's what
More good news to why I love vacant land. It's just gravy for the township. to use for projects.
So Ted, you're saying work fast. Since we know they're trying to liquidate the estate as we speak.
Yeah.
They've already sold part of it.
And I don't want to derail the conversation, but it's important since he added that. But when we set the base, it's the taxable value that's in effect in 2021, which is based on the assessment done December 31st of 2020. So even if it was to occur,
If there was a sale to occur.
yeah, and but we've established that base. It's the same reason why we want to include the Delta Crossings project, the less that gets built and on the tax rolls and do this before January 1 next year. It's another example of why you want the base being this year.
Question about the tip for you. Please don't go in. So
I'm the numbers guy.
in my research on TIFs, I found It says the goal of offering a TIF under an economic development tool such as the CIA is to invest in public works that will attract private development. So for instance, the IDE property, we would want to perhaps put in curbs, we want to put in sidewalks, we would want to put in benches for bus stations or that sort of thing. Now, I don't understand when you say the TIF can be used to cap for private development.
Yeah, let me explain that.
Thank you.
I'm really glad you asked it, because I talked to Suzanne in the break about this. I was getting a sense of some of that confusion. So you have the ability under a CIA, which is not being proposed, which was never proposed in 2020, even when this discussion was, to use money physically on private properties activities. And what I mean by that is it's not in a public right of way or easement. Everything that's on these lists right now, whether it's within a large parcel like the IDE parcel or the Delta crossings, is been proposed to, according to these lists, only on public infrastructure, public right of way or easement, any infrastructure in public right of way or easement. However, CIAs, where private comes in, where you have the abilities, when you start getting below on that bottom table there in the second column, very bottom off the board, when you start talking about demolition, facades, asbestos abatement, physical improvements to private property. CIAs are one of the few tools that you can do that on. DDAs are another one. But that's why in this exercise that occurred, do you want to be using those monies? When the initial presentation to the CIA came before you for the consideration of Delta crossings, it was because infrastructure improvements, public right of way and easement infrastructure was what's holding the project back, why that property couldn't get developed. It's such a huge parcel. And it's all going to be for public benefit. So it happens to be, though, that the township isn't financing. So this is where the private versus public comes in. So a private developer can petition to do the activities or projects on the list that are on private property currently that will be dedicated to public easements or in public infrastructure areas. So these are things that normally get dedicated to a municipality. There's maintenance agreements, there's access agreements, there's various things that will deem it eligible. But it's on private property currently. The developer is going to expend the cost for it, get reimbursed for it, and then dedicate it or convey it to the public for public use. So that's where that distinction comes in. So we haven't been, and it's something I'll let Suzanne, kind of take that over, but do you want to open it up for, there's been, there's some, depressed properties maybe on the east side. Do you want facade improvements? Do you want to use the dollars for demolition on a property that you don't own? It's not publicly owned. We never started the conversation like that in 2020, but you have that ability to include those activities or projects for private benefit.
But we have done a brownfield. We do
Brownfield is
do blights, we
Correct.
do expend money on private property for the good of the township. So
correct. And the EDC. So those might be the tools that you want to use as opposed to the CIA, not to confuse them.
Yeah.
Now, there is a benefit to including, and I'll end with this, there is a benefit to including demolition and asbestos abatement in a CIA. And the reason is that if you have other projects, other activities like infrastructure, let's say there were buildings on, I know there's no buildings on the IDE property, I don't believe there are, but let's say there were buildings there and it's $500,000 to demo and asbestos abate those buildings. Well, you could do a brownfield, but they also have infrastructure improvements and you're not a core community, so you can't do a brownfield TIF. You can only use the CIA because it's in the plan. Well, rather than going to two TIF authorities within your own township, just put it all under the CIA because it's one revenue source. It's one governing body. Administratively, it makes sense. It's a simpler to do it in those rare situations to do it under the CIA. That's why I would include those as activity costs. Yeah.
I have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm gonna muddy the waters a little bit with sort of a blended question because we were talking about the development area and the TIF area. And a very tangible need for the township is to have a non-motorized pathway that crosses I-96/69. And the ideal place to have that, not the only place, but the ideal place to do that is to extend our east-west pathway where it stands now and somehow directly go west across the highway with the pedestrian bridge into the Delta crossings and integrate that development and those future residential houses and even cross Broadbent and connect into that existing older neighborhood and even beyond that, and eventually get to our park, Luton's Park, which is in our master plan for non-motorized transportation, which would be combined with actually some Eaton County Drain Commissioner property, which would be a sizable chunk of land there. But however, I mean, there's probably three options. One would be that direct route. It would take, a sizable amount of money. It would take some federal dollars. It would take some match. And, I think that's doable if it's, a goal of, the township. There's also the possibility of going and crossing over Willow Highway. Willow Highway Bridge cannot accommodate a pedestrian crossing, so you'd have to build a bridge there as well. And then the other option is go underneath the existing highway, the sidewalk on this side, on the north side, where an existing sidewalk does not exist. It exists on the south side. And you would be crossing 4 entrance and exit ramps, 4. Okay, and they're taking those at speed.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you get across that, now you're at the ingress, egress to one of the side roads that goes into Delta crossings before you even get to Marketplace. So that's problematic from a safety point of view. But my question is this. I look at the map and we have our CIA district, and it's whether we want to capture the tax increment finance agreement within a particular boundary there. But none of those 3 scenarios that I just told you fall within that map. And so I don't know if it would be, when you're talking about private, if you're talking about public right of way, there's existing public right of way underneath the highway. There's not existing, that would be the direct route east-west that crosses there. And there is not one at Mount Hope Highway, or excuse me, Willow Highway as well. So if we're thinking about making adjustments here for future possibilities, is that something, I mean, that is sort of a can of worms question, but is there a methodology that we can do to determine what would be feasible and what would be not?
So property, just let me ask a question, and you can answer. So where these routes are, there's currently, it's none of the colored parcels where the route would be, except for the one that goes under the highway.
On the west side of the highway, it would include Delta crossings, but not at Mount Hope. There's some private land between the development area there and the highway. And certainly all 3 locations, well, except the 2 locations that would be Willow and the direct route east-west. And theoretically, I guess the right of way outside here, but again, that is problematic because of the multiple crossings there.
So public connections, right of ways and easements, I would want to weigh in with an attorney on the CIA's aspect of this to answer that specifically, draw on a map where those lines are, but those corridors, those connections within a CIA, as long as it benefits the CIA and it's for public use and meets all the requirements, we're not showing the color, the right of way and easement connection under the highway, right?
Right. Showing it in any
but it is part of it. It is part of the corridor. So the interpretation that I've heard from several attorneys over the years is those interconnections, rails, trails, all those things, bridges would be an eligible expense because it's part of the corridor to benefit the corridor. And so you'd have to make a strong argument. If it falls, the question is, if it's a mile south of this, we got to go over here to come here to go up. You're not going to win that argument. But if it's logical and makes sense and it's in a public right of way or easement, I could see an attorney stand behind that as far as the interpretation of the law that could be.
So my point being is that the two safest alternatives would not fall within that, and the most dangerous would.
Okay.
So, but you could do a proportionate, I mean, if it's a
Might not
longer
get all the
path,
money.
you might not get
Yeah.
all of the money, but you could
That's
expend
what I
some
mean,
of the money.
and to Ken's point, I mean, it would be nice to be able to use the tax capture for, the match costs and all that sort of things for such a project. But, we're not limited to that, not at all. But I
Yeah.
was just
But
trying
I
to
think-
devise a way where, could we be able to?
I would include it today, but the key where you're tripping the law is if just because it's included until we're ready to use it, we don't have to have that definitive answer.
But I
You're
think
not
you'd
capturing
want, but your feasibility, so your planning and feasibility analysis would then tell you, I mean, that would help to tell you what the preferred path is, whether it's in or out. We'd want to make sure that that question's answered.
Is it close enough in
Yeah.
to be allowed, or is only a portion of it? We can work through all those nuances, but I would include it now because it's your one-time opportunity to identify it as an eligible cost.
And not to belabor the point, but it is possible, there would probably be, you could go along the right of way of the highway. That's a public right of way. You'd have to get agreement
Yep,
through MDOT,
yep.
for example. There would be, if we wanted to do the direct route straight across for the east-west pathway, then go across the pedestrian bridge into the development, which would be the most ideal. There would be a small section there we would have to get an easement from. That's the portion that we may not be able to justify in using captured revenue, but we could use our own resources to get an easement for that.
You use a
See what I
combination.
mean?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep, you could bundle.
And then the cost of construction of the crossing though, that would fall because it would be in a right of way.
Mhm.
Even though it abuts up to the Delta crossings, would that be a feasible argument?
It would be a strong argument. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's the benefit.
All right.
And-
Regardless what we do, we have to have any type of freeway crossing, or whether it's on Willow or under the freeway or across the freeway, we have to have a feasibility study, which we, propose having in there. Because you have to start with that to be able to determine where it is feasible and to make your justification. So I would argue that fits into.
Well, I understand that.
That-
My
that's
question
the study.
pertained to would it be possible to utilize captured money for
Right.
that purpose? Because does it fall within the geography, the outline
Right.
of the, and I didn't see it did, but I think we've answered the question.
What Eric's saying is it doesn't have to be precise. It doesn't like chop off
Yeah.
right there. If it's a key connector to benefit the district,
Yeah.
you can make that argument. It's just how far afield are you going?
Who do we have to make the argument to?
The state tax commission, ultimately, I mean, they're the ultimate, you have to
Yeah.
report every year. But we would want to know the answer before,
Sure.
Yeah.
obviously, but when we would, as part of the planning process.
Andrew has a question then, Chris.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to the previous conversation. And Eric, you were, when we were talking about the TIFs and the value of creating one for Delta Crossing and potentially the I property. And, there was a conversation about private investment, using those captured dollars for private investment. But I just want to kind of get some clarity, because earlier this evening, there was a discussion or a point made that the investments in that private property or private investments had to be within the TIF. And given that's vacant property, the I property, is there really value. I guess I'm struggling a little bit to understand what private investments, what value there would be. I'm sure any developer could come to us and say, oh, well, you pay for part of our cost, but I don't know if that's really consistent with our purpose and intent with the CIA. But we could use those captured revenues to make investments in the East End, that improvements there where we're
You
not
have the
generating
choice.
revenue.
You're not making a decision today when you adopt and if you include the I property and the Delta Crossings property, let's say you decide to do that as the only TIF captured parcels. They're in, all the others are in the development plan. And all of those projects, whether it's paid for by a developer in a public right of way or easement or paid for by the township in a public right of way easement, that's expenditure. So the I parcel, let's say they come to you and you ask to see the pro forma, you ask to see the numbers, you ask to see for the justification, and you really don't need it. Or we don't think you need it, or you need half. You don't have to give the benefit to that development. Now, if they say, oh my gosh, we got all these public roads, we've got all this, other infrastructure, not really unlike the Delta Crossings project. And we know you allocated potential costs that could be expended to it. Again, they'd have to petition, you'd have to say, we like the project, they're in compliance, they're doing everything right. We like the speed at which the development's going to go. We like everything about it. Yeah, we'll support you for X dollars. But if you decide not to, you're still capturing that dollar amount, but you can use it for township projects as opposed to some of the private expended.
Right, but are those really private expenditures or are those public?
So on the private developer, so yeah, so in the case
For
of
roads or.
correct. So
Yeah.
one of the options, and this is going way back early, I'm going to go back to 19. That's how early I'm going to go. When we first started talking about the CIA, the question was asked, would the township support the project, and would they pay for, would they bond, would they put the roads in, would you put the infrastructure in? That used to be the way huge projects like a Delta Crossings would move forward, is the public, okay, well, yeah, they're public roads, they're water. In fact, some cities still do that. I used to work in a lot of projects where a private development come forward and the township, because they wanted to grow, they were aggressive. Macomb Township, I'll pick on Macomb. I did a lot of work over the years, way back. They were very aggressive. They would pay for these things a lot of times. There's others in Oakland County that would do that.
With the promise of the tax dollars would eventually pay them back,
But things turned out like a recession.
right? Like those ghost neighborhoods you heard of down in
Yeah.
Florida, like they built the roads and then there's
Nothing
nothing
behind
and
it.
the community's on the hook.
Yeah,
So-
and there's even townships in our immediate counties that have done similar things that I'm not going to talk about, but that has happened. And so the answer pretty much was probably no, we're not going to do that. So that's where we said, okay, well, plan B is if we can find a way to finance it, if we have a TIF behind our project, we can blow this development out in so many years because we have the ability, we can go to investors, we can go to banks, we can finance it. So the TIF gives the ability to finance that infrastructure improvement cost. And then the developers, so they're spending private money, but they're dedicating this to public right of ways or easement. So a lot of the improvements that they're putting in, they're not going to own anymore. They're not private roads. They're not.
Right.
Yeah. And
Well, that was
so,
my point. I understand the value for those public assets that may be paid for privately or from the
Okay.
TIF. My question was more around the private, what is truly private. And I realize there's investments that the TIF can make that are more private, but to me, it doesn't seem there's really much of a case or rationale for that on the I property being vacant.
exactly. It's no different than Delta Crossings. Where it makes sense is maybe there's, not that you're going to do this, but let's say it's proper parcels from the Lansing Mall area, further east. You've got some good buildings that got good bones. They're large enough, but they're 50-year-old structures. Maybe it was a former, it was an apartment project And it's fallen on hard times, neglect, it's been sold over the years. But you got a good developer comes in and wants to do something really great for that building, but they need a new facade. Maybe they need some demolition. That's where it's private for private benefit, where the CIA, if you were to include those costs or those activities or projects on the list, if they were to come to you, then you could include them. But how Suzanne said it, those, if you consider those, that's where the private parcel has to participate in the TIF capture.
Right.
They have to be in the capture. Otherwise, everybody else, or go back to the scenario, the I property and the Delta Crossings property would be paying for
Someone else's.
So you think
work.
about it like they're paying it forward and you're reimbursing them
Yeah.
with their tax dollars.
So you would
That's what
want
it is.
their
Yeah, right.
tax dollars captured if you're going to give another benefit to another private
Right.
party.
I was just that was my understanding. It didn't seem like there was a strong rationale for making private investments with TIF dollars on the IDE property.
That is correct. I would agree.
But if we set the TIF up now, we could just collect money.
Yes, no, I
Yeah.
absolutely,
Right.
that's why I
Yeah.
raised the point initially that about creating the TIF.
And you
now.
can consider in the future, if you want to help support a great project, possibly if they petition and
Sure.
come to you.
But we just need to make sure that there's enough room in that ceiling.
Yeah, so we would want to include
We would want to
the
anticipate
forecasting
some.
ability that we can do from the information we just heard here. We could forecast what that would be. Now, the trick would be, how aggressive do we get? And not to get you into the weeds, that's my world, but eventually you'll see that. In what year do we forecast that maybe the IDE property will come
Yeah.
online?
Yeah.
Is that 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We would want to be conservative. We would probably say, let's pick it somewhere far enough in the future, past a recession cycle that normally happens every, 12 to 15 years. Let's pick it maybe after that and then forecast it after that. We can have those discussions if you decide to include it.
And it,
Chris is trying to get it.
I just need to use the bathroom. That's all. Everybody's talking. I'm like, may I be excused?
Maybe it's a good time to take a
it might be,
But we're gonna continue the discussion. We're not taking-
Can I? I mean,
Yes.
Fine, Doug.
Okay, just piggybacking on what has been said here and what Andrea and Mary were saying. So let's say we decide to go ahead and add in the IDE property. And, but next year they decide, you know what? A developer goes, geez, I'm gonna build something there. I wanna do something. So does that change if we've been made an arrangement with Delta Crossing, a commitment to whatever levels of
Good question.
dollars we're going to help them?
That it's
Does
like
that
money.
change? Yes.
I have a solution
So
for
it
you.
seems like, does that change the pool of money? Now you've got this new IDE people coming over going, I think I want to build something
Yeah,
and I want
so
a piece of the pie.
here's how you handle that.
Yeah,
This
you
is-
do, but does that, how does that impact a Delta crossing? If that's
This
approved
is,
for them?
this is not a question I've not fielded ever before. This happens a lot. And so what you do is in the development and reimbursement agreement between Delta Crossings and the township, once we get to that part, once all this approvals are done, they're going to ask for only their dollars back.
Mhm.
But it's not all of the dollars because they're sharing it with you for your project list as well. We're going to get to a point at some time where we have this pool of revenue generated from Delta Crossings that is going to be shared between them and your project list. Now, IDE comes in, their property gets built. They want to participate same way. You go into a separate development agreement with them that is based on their revenue only. So we're not commingling revenue streams. We're gonna have a track pot from Delta and we'll have a track pot from IDE. But guess what? You're gonna also want a piece of their portion
Mhm.
for your projects.
Mhm.
So you're gonna enter into a sharing arrangement on those revenues with IDE. We're gonna actually show you one of those sharing arrangements on Delta in a future meeting. Because we're trying to work ahead of you to keep up with all of this. So we've already done one of those sharing arrangement, kind of an estimate. So we're ready to play with that in another session.
Thank you.
It's a great
Other
question.
questions, or can we move on?
Let's move on.
We're still on task 2, goal 2.
Maybe if I leave.
So goal 2 was, we want to define the geography. So Mary weighed in saying that she does not support the entire corridor because of the administrative burden, because it's not worth the return. But as Eric pointed out, you could have other, if somebody wanted to, improve their building and do that, then you could help them with that. So that's the trade-off. So I guess I'll call the question on first on the entire corridor, whether or not there's anyone who wants to advocate for that and feel strongly about it. Point of clarification, is this binding? Because I'm not in a position to say yes or no tonight about the Ide property in the Lansing Mall. I have other resources that I would like to discuss this idea with. Sure. So what this will help us do, as Eric mentioned, we have to do alternatives and do some scenarios for you. So. Okay, so it's not binding. It's not binding. Vote. It's just, if it's nope, we're not interested in that, then that just takes it off the table and we know where we need to focus. So it's kind of the same thing with the project list. We're trying to take your temperature on where to focus the energies to save time.
And this is a discussion only. We're not making any decision on anything.
I want to be
Obviously,
clear,
things-
not that I don't trust.
They take that, they work it, that obviously drafts and stuff. will come
Yeah, no, but
through,
that's
so
a
it's
fair
worked in,
question.
But yeah, no final decisions are made on it.
I just want to bring a point up because we were challenged to do this, and I don't think that it's a conflict, but you should know that I have a business relationship with the Ide Trust. I run a restaurant in Jackson that actively trying to buy from them. And the trustee for the Ide account, Joe Costello, is my personal account. So, just so.
Just from disclosure, thanks. So does anybody, from kind of narrowing down where the geography should be, does anyone feel that we should include the entire development area also in the TIF? No.
It should be the areas where we anticipate that there could be some redevelopment, some growth of revenue and property value.
Okay.
I think the 3 areas that you outlined are the
Makes
likely
sense.
ones.
Okay. So then we can, and the Lansing Mall, I think, is much more complicated, right? I mean, they're appealing the taxes, they've got, so whether or not there's a benefit to including Lansing Mall, I think is going to be some additional discussion, right? So that one I think is a question mark, but what we can do is evaluate Delta crossings and Delta crossings with Ide and or Lansing Mall if that makes sense, but we'll do a little bit more analysis to see if it even makes sense to include or we don't bother and focus on those 2 and then have 2 scenarios where you can go if it's Delta crossings only or if it's Delta and Ide. I mean, the point about it being so low and it's gonna, if it comes uncapped, still as vacant property is pretty compelling. So I think that will be an interesting thing to evaluate. Okay. So it is 8 o'clock and I want to honor your time. We didn't get to goal 3. So I don't know if you want to continue to try to go through that, but it's going to be probably another hour discussion. And I don't want to push it and have everybody's brain melt.
Can we do it in less than an hour? It'd be better to continue moving.
I'm going to look to Eric to see if he can do it in less than an hour.
I think it would be benefit that I can do it in 15 minutes so that I can set the stage for the next discussion. Great for everybody to hear it, be thinking about it. And that's all I'd take no more than 15. I probably present it in 5. I was anticipating maybe 10 minutes of question, but we can come back with, so we don't have to get all the questions up there. But I think it would help.
But not going the planned hour, does that mean that we have another meeting on the books for the entire group? Or is that a given? There's another meeting on the books for the entire group, no matter? That's a question for the group.
I would say
Well, no, it's
yes.
a question for the leadership who set the group meeting.
Would hope so.
So what's the intent? I
think we can, and obviously I don't think there was yet, it had not been discussed to have. An joint meeting, but certainly if people desire to, we certainly can.
I personally vote just plow through it and get it done.
Do that, then do another meeting.
How do the CAA members feel?
Well, I have 8:30.
The question, well, that's what we're,
Can you
yeah.
continue without me? I'm okay with continue, all of you continue, but.
Well, there were two questions. One, I mean, whether or not we want Eric just to briefly foreshadow what could be at the next meeting. And then two, whether it should be both boards together again.
Oh, okay.
So, or that CIA carries on, but I think this has been quite productive. So that's,
Well, I think we definitely want Eric to do his presentation, and I think depending on how everybody feel, we can keep moving and seeing if we can get to your answer number 3.
Yeah.
We want out of it.
I just have to say, I can't
And
stand
then-
Is there a vote or something?
no, they're just providing direction right now that's starting to frame it. So if you have to leave, it would be fine.
And I have to leave as well. I'm sorry. I thought it was,
What time did you say you have to leave?
I do. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, now or at?
No, I can stay another, I have to leave by 8:30.
Okay.
Me too. Yeah. And I'm okay.
All right. So as he's handing that out, you can just leave that up. That's actually fine.
Is that fine?
That's a good slide, actually.
By the way, Eric will fill me in later.
I talked to him enough. So
Wait, for 1 second though, the Quarter Improvement Authority is not familiar with who you are, and
Oh.
I introduced you as Eric, but I think
yeah.
maybe for the CIA to give them a little bit more background would be helpful.
Yep. So my name is Eric Helzer. My company is Advanced Redevelopment Solutions for the CIA Board. The Township Board since 19 through now have been seeing me in some of the Zoom webinars, and I've interjected and answered some questions. I've been hired directly by Delta Crossings, by Chris and his team, and been working with them since 19. I also did the brownfield project across the street, the former Days Inn, and I do a lot of brownfields. My specialty is economic development finance. I used to work at the MEDC for a number of years, wrote a lot of policy and guidance documents for the state. And I'm a private consultant, and I work for public and private. I just happen to be on the private side. So when we brought this before the township and the township board, because I'm so integral to the numbers and the details on everything, my role is more of a supportive role now, in working with staff and working with Suzanne and providing the data and the numbers for what I'm about to go over. So that's my role on this, and you'll see me until this thing is adopted. I'll be talking to the taxing jurisdictions, answering their questions specifically, and how those agreements can be structured around the numbers. So this is a summary table of a lot of detail that ultimately will get before you in various forms, mainly the plans. And so I just want to get you familiar with this briefly. So, and then I'm going to give you some takeaways they can think about. And I'm going to do this in 5 minutes. So we're looking at the Delta Crossing projects only. All right. So this scenario that's out here before you is only what the Delta Crossings project is going to generate. So in the first column, it shows the base year of 2021, assuming it gets adopted by December 31st of 2021, using the base taxable value of 2020. When the project's fully built out, that's the second main column there, that is in about 6 years, that's what's been projected by the development team, there's going to be an increase in taxable value of $94 million. So that goes from 3 million the base year to 94 million. So the total taxable value in that project will be 97 million, just rounding here. The next row shows the taxes paid based on the future value and the increment. Okay, so the increment that we're working with in that 6-year scenario is 4.6 million. Of that 4.6 in that's a single year. Okay. The TIF revenues that are actually capturable, because we only have LCC, the township, and the county and the library, we're assuming all of those millages and those jurisdictions are going to stay in for now. Then those capturable millages are 1.9 million rounding up. So that's how that works. So we've shown you, just for forecasting purposes, a 30-year TIF plan, a 25, a 20, and a 15, based on those same. Now, those are totals. There, so it's over a 30-year period, a 25-year, 20, and 15-year period. Now, I'm not going to go through and read the taxable values, what those are cumulative over that time frame. But what I will do is talk about the captured TIF revenues. And I want to pick on the 30-year one, and then you can look to the side to the other scenarios, the 25, 20, and so on, in the interest of time. One of the things that you're going to have to decide, and it will be a policy of the CIA board and be written in and ultimately come to the township board, is what percentage of admin capture to maintain the CIA board is going to be allowed. So for purposes of this scenario, I assume 5%. So we take that off. That's about 3.16 million in the 30-year scenario. That would go to admin. Then we talked about last year with the township board, and this might be new news to the CIA board. We talked about doing what's called a pass-through. A pass-through means you're capturing those values and the revenue, but then you're redistributing it back to the taxing jurisdictions, just the captured jurisdictions that have opted in, LCC, library, township, and county. That value we put in here at 20% maintaining, because we felt from discussion, the feeling was at the township board that they liked that the 20% pass-through was an acceptable percentage. That could be 5, it could be 25. It's got to be written in, it's got to be approved in the TIF plan. But for purposes of what I'm showing you, I assume 20%. Now, the taxing jurisdictions, I think, Mary, you're looking at me, I think we talked about taxing jurisdictions, whether they do this or not. A big selling sardine for jurisdictions is, well, they don't want to lose what they're getting today. Well, they're not, because they're going to get that base, whatever they're getting. And I'm going to show them that each jurisdiction, that they're not losing anything by opting in. What they're gaining by opting in is guaranteeing that this project's going to get completed. That's the key. Without the project getting completed, we don't have the revenues to pay for the expenses. So by giving them a huge upside, we're going to pass through immediately from year one, every year, 20% of the new gain, the new taxes from this development. These are taxes that they don't have currently. That's big. Not everybody has a 20% pass-through. In fact, I would say it's very rare. The average that I see is generally less than 10% from plan to plan. So this is a pretty good benefit. So that's 12.6 million. When we subtract the 3.1, the 12.6, what we're left with is that next row, the total CIA TIF revenues available. That's what we call capacity. So once you establish a policy and administrative percentage and agree to the pass-through amount, and the jurisdictions opt in ultimately, we have a capacity under the 30-year scenario of $47 million. That's what we can use toward projects, what's on the board. So for purposes of discussion, and talking to Suzanne, we went around, do we end there? But no, I think it's important for you to see the forecasting. What are we really talking about? Well, the principal projection in 2020 that we had, this is before construction plans and everything, was about $14.3 million that we presented to the township board. And that was on the Delta Crossings project. The real number is now just under 18 million. But for purposes of our discussion, the principal cost I've included is 14.3. Working through, which is in your packet, Suzanne, I don't know what page that was, but I just looking at the principal cost plus the appreciation of escalation of the township projects that are on that list right there. If you, and that's that far right, third, page 14, and it's on the board there, that third sheet. That's 4.97 million. So we included that. So what's remaining? Why we call that surplus revenue. So in the 30-year scenario, the surplus revenue is 28 million. Now, what we're not including, which will be included, and it's another policy discussion, just like admin and pass-through, is going to be what percentage of contingency will you allow as a board? because you really should have contingency on hard numbers, and interest. The cost of finance is a real number and is normally supported, but that's a range. The state supports a 5% interest policy. I've seen, I work with one city up in Traverse City, they support a 2.5%. That's their policy. Certain other jurisdictions are 3.5% that I work with. And so that's something that you have to establish as a policy. What are you going to support for contingency and interest? So really that surplus row of 28 million under a 30-year scenario is going to be less, because what I'm going to eventually show, once you have a discussion and decide what those percentages are, it will reduce that. So that's what the plan would be written for. Now that again is only for the Delta Crossings project being included here. So then you can look across the 30-year plan, you know, has a surplus of 28, 25 is 17, 8.4 on the 20-year. And then we have a deficiency, only paying, you know, only on the principal costs only, not even allowing for contingency or interest. The 15-year is deficient by almost $250,000. So, or over. So ultimately, this gives you an idea of how these numbers work. So decision factors that I wanted to leave you with are, what do you think for admin? What are your thoughts on pass-through? What is it on contingency and what is it on interest? So those are 4 decisions that we need to make, in addition to what parcels we're going to capture from. And then that I would run them for all scenarios here, the 4 scenarios. So you could effectively look and say, okay, hey, if we allow a 15% contingency and a 5% interest, and we keep the other things that I've assumed here correct, we can pay this off. I'm making this up because I didn't run all those because I don't know the numbers, but 25 years. And maybe that's how you decide it. Or maybe you say, you know what, there's a little shortfall in the 20, if we go 20 years, gets everybody close. We're okay with that. Another thing is, well, maybe if we did less of a pass-through, the township, for example, could do a 5% pass-through or no pass-through at all. And we could give the county, the library, and LCC the 20. That you're 29% of the millages that are captured. That's another scenario. So there's a lot of creativity that can get put into here, and I don't want to confuse you, but there are other mechanisms and ways we can pay off projects in a shorter period, and we can pick and choose. And normally, some townships do that. They'll say, okay, well, we're not going to do it, but we'll give it to the other jurisdictions because we know that's the way to get their approval, and we'll do it that way. And for purposes of just knowledge, what your 20% pass-through is, I put that last row there to show you of that 20% pass-through of all taxing jurisdictions, what percentage is the township, and that goes to the paramedic and operating mills for the township. Under the 30-year, it's 3.8, 2.9, and so on. You can see that last row. So that's the dollar amount over that period of time that those millages would get allocated. It comes to the township and gets redistributed.
Okay, so explain the 230,112 deficiency. So you're saying that for the 14.3 to be captured by the developer in the 15-year plan, they would be short 230,000?
It's the 14.3 and the 497, the township projects. There's two, we're tracking 2 totals of cost. There's the township projects there, that 3rd column, which is 4.97. And then what we were projecting to you in 2020, which was 14.3, now almost 18. That's the developer amount. That's how that shortfall's there. And that's without contingency and without interest on those 2 numbers. I didn't go to the bottom row. They have a small contingency on that table. We only included the escalation and the principal cost to get to the 4.97.
So in that 15-year scenario, that's an example where the township could go with a 15% pass-through versus 20 and
Correct.
offset that shortfall.
You got it. You figured it out. Yep. That's when we start to evaluate and changing things around.
So this shortfall is the township's shortfall?
Negotiated. That's between you and,
No.
The TIF shortfall.
it's a TIF shortfall.
Everything that's being funded by it, there's not enough money. So you gotta decide, do you take your 5% administrative, do you take your 20% pass, do you do that? That's what that means. So it's not.
Can I
give the
ask
14
you
million.
why the developer started this conversation with the board with a $14 million capture
So we were
and a
asked,
20% pass-through with you knowing that there was an interest charge that was never discussed in any of our conversations, knowing that you were going, that there was going to be a shortfall, why would you put that on the table other than to I don't want to use the word trick, but that's what comes to mind, and I can't think of another replacement word
yeah, so no,
into agreeing to this.
no, so you were not even agreeing to any money at that time. All you were
Well,
doing
we
is
were
looking at it.
philosophically agreeing to an idea, a project
Correct.
of move, and this, we spent a year on this moving forward.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand how, when it was all grand and glorious and money for everyone, that we're now in the hole. That's what I'm
So,
trying to understand,
yeah.
when it's the same dollars that you put on the table to start with.
So what we did is we showed an example of what it could be. We forecasted based on cost per acre, simply what to improve land. And we had no known right-of-ways, no known easements. No, we had no plan. We didn't have a site plan even approved at that time. So then we had a phase one approved, and then we were going into costing a phase two. So where we're at today, we took the phase one and phase two costs, the development team did, and we projected those to a plan that was presented to the planning commission, where we thought the project would be in phase 3 through 6A, 7, so they kind of changed around. So everything is at an estimate. Even your numbers, you don't have design on any of those costs. How those came up with, I don't know. They could be $3 million off. I don't know. But it was an estimate at that time to try to determine, what the years would be. There's so many variables that, between pass-through and admin and contingency and interest that we have to go into. It'd be tough for us to tell you what you're going to decide.
So would it be accurate to say then, I'm sorry.
Two things. One, is it possible to get this electronically? Let's see it a little
I
bit better.
can send it to Suzanne and she can send it out to
Great.
Brian.
And
Yep.
two, this is based on the $14 million ask.
Yeah, so
Can you
we-
do a scenario with the 18 million?
I
Because
can.
it's become 18 million now,
Well,
or
so
projected to be.
I have had, and he's not here unfortunately, but I will fill him in. I have had conversations with Chris. And I said, in my earlier scenario, this is about a month ago, I have run this out. And it's easy for me to do. Yes, I can do
Thank
that
you.
for you, to answer your question. But I think they are willing to go into this with the 14.3 principal cost. And then whatever the board decides for contingency and interest to be added on top of that, assuming, the 5 and 20% are still the same as well. I can reforecast it. Once I know those 4 variables, I can reforecast it.
Okay. And then do you plan to get confirmation on that cap in? Is it going to be 14.3 or
I
is there
will-
still a work that they need to do?
I had a conversation today and I got the green light to put the 14.3 on there.
Okay. And does that include, sorry, Ken, my last question. This is based, will it change or could it change based on adding more phases? Because we've started with, I think it was 3 phases and it was 4 phases and
Yeah,
it was
so the
5
plan
phases.
can evolve. It's a great question. The plan can change. Again, the taxable value that this was estimated on was, I think in May, whenever we were in planning commission and I was working with Ted, the assessor, We drew a line in the sand on a plan, and you have a benefit here. Well, normally, this is important for the CIA board too. Normally, when CIAs are set up, we know what the zoning is, we know what it could be rezoned at, and we project. Just like what we do, or how we would talk about the I property, we don't have a site plan. Normally, that's how these things are put together. DDA is the same way. We had the fortunate opportunity to be under the process of planning where we could forecast, but it's going to continue to move. The market over 6 years is going to change. You're going to have new users. They're going to see, other people want to locate there. Size of the buildings could change, all within, the approvals of the planning commission and this board. So we're in a better situation today with the Delta Crossings project than we would be if you were to put this up to try to develop the I and Delta property.
Okay.
So
And I have
it can change.
One last thing,
It can
and I'll be
change.
done, seriously, because I really do have to go. Eric, I trust you wholeheartedly, so don't take this personally.
No, that's fine.
But with you being connected to the Delta Crossing and then providing us with these figures, which I totally believe, it just seems to me, should we be having someone who's not connected to the Delta Crossing to be providing us with data and numbers?
So let me answer that. I would say, no, you don't need to, and here's why. I do this for both the public and the private. I work on both sides of the table. What I'm doing specifically, all the numbers I run through Ted. The taxable.
Who pays you?
The developer's paying me.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
what I wanted to know.
Yep, that's okay. Now, the taxable value, the values I don't establish the taxable values. They're projections based on real numbers. So what we did was we went and looked at Michael's, we looked at Lowe's, we looked at the hotels, the hotel across the street. We looked at all of these properties across the township and projects that the township doesn't even have currently that are similar to what Delta Crossings is projecting. We came up with a very detailed breakdown of what those were. We forecasted those. We worked back and forth with the assessing department and came to an agreement of reasonable projection. Again, everything's projections, of reasonable projection. And when we did that, that's what derived the increased taxable value amount. Everything stems off of there. There's no manipulation to numbers or nothing that I can do. Everything is fed off of millages, percentages from that number. So the millages are the millages that come against the taxable value. That derives the taxes paid forecast, and it also derives the capturable millages. So really there's nothing, everything is an open book. They see all my spreadsheets, they saw all the numbers. And until I got that green light I couldn't present anything. I couldn't even prepare this. So now it's just a matter of you guys deciding percentages, and that's just simple math. Off of that, yeah.
And if your numbers are wrong, you could be screwing your client.
Oh, I'd be hurting him, yeah. But this is a pretty.
I like the short answer.
Yeah. So, and there's no benefit for me to inflate anything. That's another thing, working for the private, and I have to answer this as a public consultant too. There's no benefit, be to her point, I'd be hurting the client, because I never want to overestimate. But you never want to be super conservative. You want to find that happy medium. But that's where I rely on the experts, and that's the assessing department. They're the ones that send out the bills. I don't.
Thank you.
That's a fair question, and I rolled that in my head just the other day.
I'm not writing your TIF plan. That's what she's doing.
No, I totally
just
get
providing
that.
the
I
data.
totally get that.
No, and I question it, and I'm like, no, you've got your assessor, the numbers are the numbers, and he doesn't want to damage this. I mean, he wouldn't be in business if he was damaging his client. So that was.
I've been doing this 23 years, to give you an example.
I can
And I
tell
also
by your
represented the state
flow
too.
chart here. I can tell.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken.
So would it be accurate to say that in addition to contingency, interest, admin, and pass-through that need to be determined for this, and this is for the benefit of the CIA board who might not have sat in on all of these discussions, this 14.3 million, we don't have to include that in the TIF. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So that does not have to be paid back to the developer. We can let that sit in the TIF and use it for other projects. So I just wanted to be clear on that, that is another thing that is changeable in this plan. Okay.
Right, when that comes before you, so we've got a projection of that cost and then whatever, to your point, the contingency and interest is or is not, whatever that turns out to be. That ultimately the agreed amount for reimbursement is in that development and reimbursement agreement to the developer. So that's a final document, once the plans are approved, that gets signed between the township and the developer. So that's how the revenues then
Yes,
flow.
but we're not bound to that at this point.
Oh, no, no.
No.
And just
Okay.
remember though too, if this doesn't get built, all these numbers are off. So it's not like there's 14 million necessarily there. If they stop building, then that money all stops. It all goes away.
Yeah, and one last important thing, these are only estimates. They only get reimbursed. Township only gets reimbursed for what you spend. So there's a whole process that's identified in the development reimbursement agreement. You have to turn in invoices, you have to turn in proof of payment that it was expended toward that project line item. And there's a whole complicated tracking system, which we had to set up in advance, which we did in order to track all of this, so that when the developer comes to get reimbursed or the township gets reimbursed, you can actually send in that reimbursement request up to that dollar amount. But it's a cap too. So that's another thing. It's not open book.
Yes.
Ken, you're reading my mind because I was just gonna remind everybody that, you know, what Fonda had mentioned earlier is that, you know, these were phases and these phases are still in flux. We don't know, and they don't necessarily know the types of buildings, how many are actually gonna go up. Only incrementally do they know that. So, you know, these numbers are as good as that, even though the methodology of the computations, you know, might be sound based on the base level. But that base level is projected on a scenario of completion that is not yet evolved to the point of certainty in any degree. And I just want to remind the board of that.
Yeah, and you would have that same, is kind of like the back to the eye discussion of vacant land. I
Yeah.
mean, you can think of it as the future phases and they're doing their projection, but you can think of it as vacant land and your best guess about what's gonna happen.
And that's an important thing on the I property. If you bring it in, what year do you bring it in? You know, we know just because we have a project that's underway, do we want to phase it in and bring it in 5 years, 10 years from now? So to your point.
But I would like to see the figures updated. I'd appreciate if staff could work together and maybe review what these other alternatives would be as far as admin costs and the other things. Work with the consultant, give us a little bit of understanding of when you mix and match these different things, how that would maybe change, to your point, the bottom line total on these. I think that would be helpful. Mary, you look confused.
What, you lost me.
Okay, so there's like this 4 different scenarios, unresolved.
Five timeline is.
5?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, so 5% administrative cost, for example, what if it was like 2.5 rather?
Yep.
What if we said, no, we're not gonna take the 20% pass through to us? Just a couple scenarios like that might be helpful.
I'm trying to figure out how to make this fun, like if it's to choose your own adventure or something.
Yeah. You know, maybe half and whole or something like that.
Yeah.
But, something like that to make it simpler.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay.
And it is past 8:30, so I do want to, it's been a long day. Did I guess you'll have to decide whether or not this is fruitful. I do want to try to figure out this last portion. We had the township board asking a lot of questions, didn't hear a lot from the CIA, and I want to make sure we'll have to figure out how to maybe rebalance the discussion a little bit so we hear from our CIA members too. So.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the discussions, we need to have a CIA board discussion on these issues as well, and maybe having each board moving forward
discussing these questions separately may be a better way to
Yeah.
go.
What we could do is the CA, maybe we use the 9th as the opportunity for the CIA board to kind of talk through maybe some of those 5 variables. And you kind of verify that which ones might be interesting to look at. And then Eric can run the numbers and then maybe we come back together as a group based off of the CIA's kind of recommended scenarios. That might be one way to do that.
Yeah, we can look at that, but yeah, I think the next step is to bring back stuff to each board separately, look at it.
Well, I think that's fair because we are miles down the road and ahead of the CIA because we've been looking at this for months. So.
And I think Rachel had her hand up.
So at that point, when we get to, and thank you for recognizing our space and time, I think that would be great to convene with you after we have a little more time to digest everything as well. So when we get to meet again and kind of walk through this, will the different scenarios with the Delta and the I and the possible mall be ready at that time for us to kind of really take it all in before we all kind of move forward? Is that, or is that too soon to have those kind of forecasting thoughts available?
I think what the next step would be, the CIA would have a conversation with Eric about what are the scenarios that you want to see?
Okay.
And then we'd run the scenarios and then either bring them back just to the CIA board or maybe have another shared meeting where it's, you all see the scenarios and can discuss them.
Okay.
I think we can probably bring back a lot, at the next CIA board meeting, we can probably bang through a lot of these scenarios, so we don't have to have the discussion of what we want to see, so we can put a lot of stuff on paper to kind of expedite
Yeah,
that.
the numbers would be like, the more the numbers that could be ready ahead, like it's just easier for me to process versus.
On the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that'd be great. Thank you.
For me, at least, understanding the 5% admin, when we get the manipulation and easy enough to put algorithms together that we could, to your point, do test studies and change the numbers and see how it comes up. But I'd like to be able to discuss, why 5%? What does it go to?
Yeah, correct.
What are the
Same,
admin
the
costs
rationale.
that we're trying to cover.
Absolutely.
What's the interest rate?
Yeah, all that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we've had a very good discussion tonight, so we may not have gotten all the answers that we said.
Got 2 out of 3.
But we certainly have made great progress and had a great movement in understanding the whole process and everything. So thank you, everybody, for putting in the hours this evening to do this. And seeing no further business before this joint meeting, we are adjourned.